In the rolling hills of Plateau State, Nigeria, a terrifying mystery has silenced the village markets. Imagine a community where mothers weep over empty bowls while Princess Maria uses every drop of local milk for her private baths. To the villagers, she is a monster of vanity, but the truth is far more chilling. Maria is a creature of dust, and the milk is the only thing keeping her from crumbling into the earth. In this high-altitude village, the white gold of the cattle was once their pride, thick, sweet, and life-giving. It built the bones of the young and sustained the elders through the cold mountain nights. However, for 3 agonizing months, the king's new decree has stripped every household bare. Not a single cup is spared for a starving child. Every bucket is whisked away to the palace under the watchful eyes of armed guards. While the children grow thin and the cattle low in thirst, the palace air has turned thick and sour. The people whisper of a curse, unaware that their princess is a walking ghost, held together by the very food they need to survive. The son of a Plateau State had become a vengeful god, baking the earth into jagged red scales. In this highland village, the white gold of the cattle was the only thing keeping death at bay, yet a terrifying silence had fallen over the milking pails. King Obi's decree was absolute. Every drop of cream must be delivered to the palace for Princess Maria's indulgence, while village infants grew skeletal and weak. Luca, a herder with fire in his eyes, watched his little sister collapse in the dust, her lips parched and white. As the king's guards moved in to seize their family's last bucket of milk, Luca's grief curdled into a desperate, dangerous resolve. He would not watch his sister die for a princess's vanity. While the villagers whispered of curses in the patch market, Luca sharpened his gaze toward the ivory palace on the hill. He promised himself that by dawn, he would find a way past the spears and the stone walls to reclaim the lifeblood of his people. But as he approached the gates, he saw a line of farmers being dragged away in chains, their cows confiscated forever. Infiltration was a gamble with his life, but Luca managed to slip through the servants' entrance, disguised in the tattered tunic of a kitchen scrub. The moment he crossed the threshold, the legendary opulence of the palace vanished, replaced by a sensory nightmare. The air was thick, heavy, and nauseatingly sour, the smell of 1,000 gallons of milk rotting in the tropical heat. As he hauled heavy wooden buckets toward the forbidden east wing, he noticed the other servants were trembling, their eyes downcast and filled with a haunted, hollow dread. "Do not look at her," a girl whispered, her hands shaking as she scrubbed a floor stained white with corded waste. Luca's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird as he reached the bottom of the grand staircase where the king's personal guards stood like statues of iron. Just as he prepared to turn back, a muffled, agonizing shriek erupted from the chambers above. It wasn't the sound of a pampered royal, it was a sound of absolute, soul-shattering torture that froze every person in the hall. Taking advantage of the guard's sudden distraction, Luca shed his sandals and ascended the stairs like a shadow. He reached the heavy, carved doors of the princess's suite, pressing his ear to the wood. There was no splashing of a luxurious bath, no song of a content girl. Instead, the air was filled with a rhythmic, sickening snap and crack, like dry branches being snapped by a winter wind. More, a voice rasped, sounding like sandpaper on stone. "It is pulling apart. I can feel the dust rising." Luca peeked through a narrow gap in the doorframe and saw the king himself, his robe stained and his crown discarded, frantically pouring milk over a figure hidden behind heavy silken curtains. The desperation in the king's voice was not that of a ruler, but of a man losing his mind. Suddenly, the cracking sound grew louder, followed by a wet, heavy thud. A pale, chalky hand gripped the edge of the curtain, and as the light hit it, Luca saw the skin instantly fracture into 1,000 grey pieces. The door groaned under his weight, and the king's head snapped toward the sound with murderous fury. The king's roar sent Luca scrambling into a nearby alcove, but he could not unsee the horror. In the center of the room sat Maria, her face a beautiful, porcelain mask, but her body was a nightmare of decomposing earth. Without the milk to bind her, she was a vessel of parched dust and brittle white bone. Luca realized the terrifying truth: the princess was a walking tomb, a reanimated corpse held together by the stolen life of the village. The milk wasn't for beauty, it was the supernatural glue preventing her from dissolving into a pile of mountain dirt. As he washed, a guard accidentally knocked over a small vase of water. A single stray drop landed on Maria's wrist, and before Luca's eyes, her flesh turned to steam and the bone underneath crumbled into ash. She screamed, a sound of fire and dry wind. The king lunged toward the spill, his eyes wide with a madness that surpassed any law. He turned to his captain, his voice a jagged blade, the cows are dry. If there is no milk left, start the slaughter. Bring me their blood. Luca fled back to the kitchens, his mind reeling from the king's monstrous command. He found the servants huddled in terror. The order had already been issued to kill the village's last sacred cattle to keep the Dust Princess wet. He realized that King Obi had traded the lives of his people for a hollow shadow, a deal made in the evil forest that could only end in ruin. Luca knew he had to reach Maria herself. The girl who once loved the mountain springs must still be hidden within that shell of cracked earth. He bypassed the guards and burst into her chamber, confronting her with the reality of the starving babies and the dying fields. "Is this life?" he demanded, pointing to the sour, curdled dregs in her tub. Maria looked at him, and for the first time, her milk-white tears were not of pain, but of shame. "I died on the cliffs," she whispered, her voice a hollow echo of the wind. But before she could speak further, the king burst in, his sword drawn and red with the first of the cattle's blood. The king threw Luca across the room, his face a mask of grief-driven rage. "You will steal her from me again," he screamed, raising his blade. But Maria rose from the tub, her body cracking with every movement as the milk dripped away. She saw the buckets of blood being brought into the hallway and the smoke of a village beginning to burn in protest. The high stakes had reached a breaking point. The entire plateau was on the verge of a bloody uprising that would leave no one alive. "Father, look at what you have made me," she cried, her voice shattering the silence. She moved toward the balcony, the very air turning her skin to gray, crumbling scales. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised purple, and a massive mountain storm was beginning to howl against the stone walls. The king begged her to stay in the shadows, promising more sacrifices, more milk, more life. Maria looked at Luca, then at the parched valley below. She reached for the heavy velvet curtains and ripped them down, exposing her fragile, dusty form to the elements. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, hitting the balcony with the sound of stones. Maria stepped forward, her arms wide, embracing the water that her father had taught her to fear like fire. As the rain lashed her skin, she did not scream, she laughed, a sound of pure, redemptive freedom. Wherever the water touched her, she hissed and dissolved into a brilliant white mist that swirled into the storm. The king collapsed, his madness finally breaking into a hollow sob as the ghost of his daughter vanished into the clouds. The rain fell for 3 days, washing away the sour scent of rot and filling the dried riverbeds with life. The village was saved, and the fields turned a vibrant green overnight. Luca stood by the new spring that bubbled where the palace once stood, watching a white mist dance upon the water. But as he turned to lead his people, he saw a familiar, dark shadow moving in the forest, the same spirit the king had dealt with, and it was looking for a new debt to collect. Tell me in the comments if you enjoyed this story. Hit that like button and subscribe for more interesting stories on folktales and epic.